Hi, everyone. Welcome to Community CPA's 3 p.m. webinar. Today is Thursday, so we have our very special guests come on today. And today we have Amner Martinez here with us. He is he does a variety of different things, right? So he's an entrepreneur. He does what we'll be talking about today is his podcast, Amplified Dsm, but he also works in human resources and has a business that way. Amner, did you want to introduce us on the topic?
Yes, thank you for inviting me again, Catherine. It's always a pleasure speaking with you. And yeah, today we're going to talk about storytelling and marketing. I have a local podcasters platform that we've only been about 3 months living, and there's 9 podcasters in Des Moines, and with interesting stories, amazing voices, brave voices, and we're going to discuss a little bit about all those today and how that can be used, or how you can adapt that into your business.
Perfect. Amner, thank you once again for joining us today. Did you want to tell us a little bit about how Amplified DSM started? What I know it's kind of a passion project for you.
Yeah.
So tell us a
Yeah.
bit more.
Yes. So Amplified started, it got launched in November of 2020. But I started my own podcast in 2019. And after about 27 some episodes, different guests, local guests, journalists, chefs, authors, I started seeing that there was a need. There was a lot of people that really liked doing this, and people wanted to do it over and over. So then I started to think about, maybe just since I've gone through the process of what not to do on a podcast, my co-producer and I, we decided to make it easier for people to do podcasts. So then we started selecting and talking to and recruiting people that have interesting stories to tell and different perspectives, and we invited them on the project, and they said yes. And so we've kind of facilitated the process for them. So Amplified DSM is a platform that can facilitate person or company to create a podcast without having to learn from from ground zero. You come in, and then we can kind of help you just kind of be more on the creative side and help you kind of tell the story. So we kind of took a lot of the legwork of the process and made it more and more fun. I mean, it's fun. The whole process, it's fun, but we try to get that out of the way. And yeah, and we worked on it for about 11 months, and we got the platform launched in November. And now every podcaster is, so we have 9 original podcasters. They're all in their 4th or 5th episode. And then we have 3 new podcasters that are joining us this coming in a matter of days. We're going to announce them. And then there's 3 more podcasters in the works that are joining us in the beginning of April. So people are getting
very exciting.
Huh?
Yes, that's very exciting.
Yeah, it's exciting. Yes, people are responding well. We like to talk. We want to be heard. We have something to say. We have things to sell. We have services to provide. So this is the perfect platform, I think.
Right. So what got you into podcasting in the first place? Like you said, you started in 2019.
Yeah.
Were there...
It kind of came naturally. So I come from the recruiting and headhunting staffing world. So I've been interviewing people since 2003. I think my old boss and I did the math a few years ago, and I've probably interviewed 10 to 15,000 people in the last decade and a half. So I kind of grew this really good knack for interviewing people and just having conversations. So it kind of naturally, I just kept finding myself in very interesting conversations and deep sometimes conversations with people. And I just kind of wanted to put them on record. And at that time, podcasting was, picking up more. It's been going on for a few years now, but lately it's just kind of been picked up more. The first idea was YouTube like 7 or 8 years ago, but that idea fell through. So just a few years later, we decided that podcast was the best platform for us. So that's kind of how I got into it.
I am so sorry. I am dealing with some webcam issues right now. So I'm trying to get it back up. But I wanted to ask, are there a few stories that you wanted to highlight from, all the different stories that you have of the ones who are participating on the platform? Are there any that particularly stand out and are strong for you?
So I'm very lucky about this project because I get to see everybody's podcast go from square one till the day of that it gets released. So from the idea to when it's already live for people to listen to. And so I'm in a very unique position where I get to see everybody's process and everybody's work. But I mean, they're all really good podcasts, and they all have a very unique voice. For example, we have Duran. He's a poet, and he dives into Black masculinity. We have Ying. She has her book, her audiobook, which every time we're uploading another chapter of Ying's book, I'm listening to it, and to find keywords to write for the description for it, and I learn. There is Shaima Ali. She does the randomly selected for random search. This is very interesting podcast. So RSRS is a stamp that after 9/11 Muslims needed to have in their American Muslims needed to have in their passport. So it's randomly selected for random search. That means that they can get randomly selected in any airport, and not the airport or security wouldn't be breaking any laws. So basically, it's legal for them to profile Muslims. It's a legal way to profile Muslims. So that's the title of her podcast. But her recent guest was Luisita. She's the executive director of the Filipino American Society here in Des Moines. And she was brave enough to come in and tell her story about how she got into the United States and that she got here as a mail-in bride. Which, when we were introduced, and Shaima's there and she's telling us who her guest is, and Luisita's there, and I'm there, and Kenji's there, as producing the sound and everything. When they told us that, I just thought, wow, this is important stuff. This is giving people bravery, but I mean, the courage that takes for you to tell that story. And then right after that, she interviewed a domestic violence survivor, and she's also the director of Beacon of Hope, I believe. So we have a number of podcasters. Chris Noth, he does the Bring It Home podcast. His first episode was about redlining and how the government has invested money into certain areas, specifically picking them and encouraging banks to invest on certain areas. And some of those areas are redlined, or they're either green or red areas, and red areas is mostly where African Americans and immigrants and people of color live, and then the green areas is where coincidentally lot of European Americans were living. So this has been going on for decades and decades and decades. So he dove into this topic and broke it down in about a 20-30 minute podcast. And it's a very intriguing to hear this, right? We don't know this, but it's still in a lot of the laws. This redlining is still impacting a lot of people. And a couple of his another episode that he did was on possibly one of the first African American slaves that in Iowa. So his podcast is also extremely interesting. So the process of a podcast is what I'm like thoroughly enjoying. The final product obviously is fun to listen to, but because I'm part of it, I get to enjoy the whole thing. I get to see it from like the thought into the production and post-production, and once it's out, then it's kind of a fun feeling to have, to be part of, like good work. Laura Rodriguez, she does undocumented momhood. She's undocumented. She happens to be my wife, but she's a brave woman, outspoken activist, very creative, and she jumped on board on this project as well. And she just had a really impactful conversation with another gal that basically one part of the story is where she's a 14-year-old teenager and ICE agents are at the door, and they are basically wanting to come into the house, and she's telling the story how she's basically face to face with this ICE agent saying, no, we know our rights, you can't take my aunt, and it's very intense conversation. So I can go down the list of all of them. The Blackened Privilege in America podcast, that one they just did. They dove deep into the contract that Ice Cube and some scholars have put together that are going to be meeting with the Biden administration, and they went point by point because not everybody's going to be reading this contract, right? So these guys are doing it for people. So podcasting has become, if you're doing it for the right reasons, and if you're doing it for for the love of it and passion of it, it can be a good vehicle for you to tell your story. And within that, you can tag your services along, whatever it is that you do in your business. And that's kind of what I'm finding out a lot here with myself. I'm doing this because it's kind of passionate about it. I'm passionate about it. I'm passionate about the voices, and I love everybody that's doing it. But somehow that's kind of returning to me in a business sense. And that's kind of a rewarding part about it, that I'm doing it for other reasons, but I'm getting a lot of opportunities to grow my business as well.
That's wonderful. So when you're talking about these like super stories, how do people, when they make the podcast, how do they want to put it out into the world? And what makes a podcast successful?
I think people respond to like realness. If you're trying to pretend, or if you're faking something, then I don't think that's gonna eventually touch the ear of the audience. No matter how imperfect it is, it doesn't really have to be perfect sound or perfect or scripted or anything. But if it's real, then you're in a good starting point. So one of our golden rules is, as long as we're having fun doing this, then we're gonna keep doing it, because there's work to it. There's work to be done in order to put a podcast out. So the podcasters are usually in charge creatively 100% of their topic and what they want to talk about. Amplified, we're just facilitating the tools and some of the editing and some guidance as to how to put it out. But at the end of the day, it has to be you, right? If you're doing a podcast, before you hit upload and put it out for whoever's going to listen to, you got to be 100% sold that you love it, like you like it, you're happy with it, and no matter what happens after that, who cares, right? So that's one key thing that we have, that nobody, nothing goes out final unless the podcaster is 100%, yep, that's the one I want out there, and we'll move forward. So we respect that a lot, because I wouldn't want anything out there that I put my name on, and if I'm not happy with it. So, but that's kind of like a gut feeling too. And you'll know when you have something good. Like I said, it doesn't have to be perfect sound, but if it's real, I think that's what makes us a successful podcast.
Awesome. So as you're doing this with people, is it like in a studio, or I don't know how that happens?
Yes. So that's a great question. Thanks to Good Vibes Movement, it's this really amazing community space here on 6th Avenue, 1600 6th Avenue is their address. They have different types of programs, after school programs. They have a hip hop Fridays for kids to come. They have yoga every morning at 6 in the morning. They have yoga in Spanish. At one point, they had a pretty popular Movement 515 was doing their classes there through their transition from one location to another. They feed the neighborhood every Sunday. They're handing out meals in the corner. I mean, this is a great organization that I would encourage everybody to go and follow and help them out, and donate or whatever. But they're a nonprofit, and we spoke to them, and they're kind enough to let us borrow their space. So that's kind of right now our headquarters is at. That's where we are recording. We just take some of their time. They're super busy, but they're very gracious to always, giving us space for us to continue to do this, because you do need space. And even the sound, usually people want very perfect sound, no echoes or anything like that. But there, you hear the cars going by, and there's a lot of noise going on, and it just kind of feels even more. It kind of gives texture to our stories. So thank you so much to Movement. I'm sorry, Good Vibes Movement. Good Vibes Movement. They're all over social media. Check them out and help them out. They're good for the community.
Yeah, I've seen and followed them. So
Yes.
It seemed like a really neat initiative.
Mhm.
So when you're doing these recordings with people, as you think about people who might want to start, what are some tips you have for what you've seen to make a successful, compelling story, right? So
Yeah.
do you recommend people scripts? Do you recommend they just talk and then edit down? What are your strategies that you think?
I would recommend to do what's natural to you. My way of interviewing is I don't prepare. I very little preparation, which is kind of dangerous, because I want to still be curious about the subject, right? So I just do a little bit of research, write down some bullet points maybe, but then the conversation just flows. But there's another podcaster that is very organized, very detailed, and they do it in one take. Like they read it, but it sounds amazing, and it's just like one of the easiest podcasts that we produce, because he's just so organized. So it just do what is natural. We have another podcasters that they're a team of two, so they're learning how to bounce back and forth without one overtaking the other. So I would say do what comes natural. If you're a super organized person, then be super organized and do it that way, scripted, and but if you're not, then just go for it. Another thing would be just like to start doing it. That's the key, because if you don't do it, you don't learn what your mistakes. So we've only gotten to this point because we keep on doing it and making mistakes, and then we figure out what we did bad, what we did wrong, and just keep fine tuning it. So do what's natural, be real, and just do it. And the more you do it, then the podcast kind of evolves into itself. You think you're going to have a certain type of podcast, but then 5-6 episodes later, it might be something completely different than what you thought or you originally had.
Right. I think that's great advice, Amner. So that's awesome. So as people are thinking about podcasts, they're probably thinking also about where does this podcast live, right? So obviously on the platform, but then what are some ways that it's distributed and put out to the public?
So to start a podcast, it's not that hard. It's the hard part, I think, is sticking with it. So you have to stick with it because it's a consistent thing that you have to do. Then you start to see some kind of evolution and results. So I can add that to, you know, any advice is like, you got to stay consistent, play like a long-term game. It's not a short-term game. But SoundCloud is a great place to start. I mean, it takes minutes to create your profile. It takes, you know, you can record a sound here on the phone, 10-minute podcast, right? I walked down today with my cup of coffee and I saw the birds and blah, 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 you know, poetry or whatever. You create your profile on SoundCloud and you upload the file and you name your podcast and there you are, you know, you have it. So that's not the hard part. The hard part is just staying consistent and really loving the process for you to kind of start getting a little bit of traction and people knowing that you're doing it for, you know, for real. But SoundCloud is a great place, but there's other places, Breaker. I mean, if you just Google hosting, you know, platforms, you'll get a list of all of them, and they all usually work pretty good. We use SoundCloud, and then that gets distributed to Apple and Spotify. So once you upload it into SoundCloud, then SoundCloud immediately sends it to Apple and Spotify once you apply for them to review it. So yeah, I want to kind of to touch base a little bit about how it would be for like a business, right? Like how would this be to help my business if I'm a plumber, or if I'm you know, a lawyer, or if I'm whatever. And right now, podcasting is the platform to get stuff out in a more so where you can take your time to tell something. So you know, usually people respond to you when you're genuine, when you're a genuine person. So sometimes, I mean, I've been doing a lot of podcasts, and for the first year, I never mentioned that I was in recruiting in my podcast. You know, I never mentioned that I was in staffing. So sometimes it's our story that people are buying. It's, you know, if you have a business, you definitely have a story to tell. You know, I mean, the fact that we're alive and we have a story, you know, everybody's life is a beautiful journey. But if you have a business, then you know what it takes to get to from the inception of your idea to touching it, to being a reality. So right there's a story. So just find the most interesting perspective of that story and just start telling it. And then, you know, you tag along there what you do for business, and then people are going to start responding.
Right. That's awesome. Any other tips that you have in terms of what you've learned about podcasting since doing this project?
Yeah, one of the things that we're kind of gearing more towards is just how do we get it out to a bigger audience, right?
Right.
But it's a tricky thing because you don't want to cater to someone right off the bat. You want to cater to yourself first. Like, make yourself happy first doing the podcast, because it's a process, like we said, right? There's a lot of steps to follow. So be happy with it first. Make yourself happy with the process. But then once you get to the point where you have the podcast and you got a name and everything, then you got to see, like, how do we get it out and share and stuff like that. So you know, it takes you wanting for people to hear it. And so that's where we are right now, is just how do we let people know that these voices are out there, and they have really beautiful stories that they're telling. And that just comes, like, we're just learning how to do that as well. You know, just doing this kind of stuff and just spreading a little bit of news that Amplified Dsm exists here in Des Moines, local podcasters that have great stories, but yeah, it's just, I think it's all comes down to how passionate you are about it. And because after that, then everything just kind of unfolds on its own.
Right. So when somebody is thinking about it in terms of like their overall marketing strategy, where would you normally put podcasts in terms of all the different sources that they can use to market?
Yeah, I mean, the big ones, Facebook, Instagram, I mean, Spotify, Apple are always really good about, most people have Apple phones, so it makes it easier for people to listen to parts. So the easier you make it for people, the better, the more convenient. So if your podcast is on Apple Podcast, then it's because the phones already come with the Apple Podcast app.
Yes.
App. So then, they just click on it. You tell them where to find it. You send it to them via message or instant message or text, and then they can hear it right away. So those would be, the ways that are, people are getting their stuff out there. Another thing I would say is, have guests that that bring some kind of value to you, even to the audience. I'm an audience. Like, I consider all my guests, they're educating me. So I'm already benefiting from me having the guests with me, right? Like, I pick their brain so I can learn more and try to be as smart as they can, as smart as they are. So, but if you have a service, bring a guest that are gonna, whoever's listening to your podcast, they're gonna walk away with valuable information, whether that's, facts or statistics or, resources, or even like laugh, like if you make somebody laugh, you've provided some value to them. Right. So
For
at the end of the day, it's got to be a little bit entertaining. Somewhere in there's got to be some kind of entertainment.
For sure. You have to evoke some sort of emotion, right?
Yeah, without selling out though. I mean, there's some podcasts or some people that are, trying to do it, which is great. It's admirable. But, audiences, we're not dumb. Like, we can sense when somebody's not necessarily doing it genuinely. So then it becomes, it's a turnoff. So yeah.
For sure. So thank you, Amner. So if somebody wanted to connect with you, what is the best way for someone to contact you?
Yeah. So we are at a point now that we can now take on more podcasters, because we're creating this kind of assembly line style. So if anybody's interested, we can help with their concept and the name, and from square one until the day is out. So info at amplifieddsm.com is where you can find me, or my email is amner@infiniteresourcesdsm.com. I try to make them as long as possible. But yeah, go to amplifieddsm.com, just how it sounds, amplifieddsm.com, and then you'll see our contact information there, and yeah, let us know if we can help, and maybe we can give you some tips.
Wonderful. So yes, and also feel free to contact Catherine at communitycpa.com, and I am happy to pass any inquiries over to Amner. So thank you, Amner, so much for your time. Once again, I always love having these conversations with you, and hopefully sometime again in person, right? So
yes. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for making time for us. We appreciate it. And yeah, we'll have to find out another topic to do one of these.
Yes, for sure. All right, everybody, join us again at 3 p.m. This Saturday. So I'll see you then.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, Amner.
Catherine. Bye-bye.
Bye.